I'm Mary Ellen Dello Stritto. I'm the director of the Ecampus Research Unit.
And Vrushali?
Hi, I'm Vrushali Bokil. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies in the College of Science, and I'm a professor of mathematics.
Awesome. So for our first question, I'm wondering if you both can describe why it is that your unit decided to engage in a diversity strategic planning or diversity action planning process this year. Mary Ellen.
All right, so I'll start. So Ecampus has been interested particularly in diversity initiatives, and particularly in the past year with everything going on in the world. I think that really spurred Ecampus into moving in this direction. And we had spent some time working with the Office of Institutional Diversity on specific events for all of our staff related to diversity. And so this was kind of the next logical step, is to take this on. And they asked me to kind of take this on for the entire organization and kind of step up what we had been doing, because what we had been doing previously was kind of, one-time trainings and things like this. And so this was the next kind of logical extension of the work that we wanted to do.
Great, thank you. Vrushali?
Yeah, so the college did a diversity action planning process in 2016. So we had a 2016 plan, and I think this was, a second plan was going to happen anyway. But there was a petition that was signed by over 100 College of Science students after the death of George Floyd on May 25th. And so the College of Science organized a town hall listening session following the petition. And the town hall listening session, which was attended by over 300 people in the College of Science, it sort of brought to light a number of the obstacles that Black students face in the College of Science, including lower retention rates, lower graduation rates. And so that sort of set the stage for what the next plan should be. And it laid the groundwork for an anti-racist plan. At that time, our Dean Roy Haggerty made a statement that, we've all got great intentions, but the outcomes that we're seeing are racist. And so the plan has to be an anti-racist plan that addresses the outcomes for underrepresented students in the College of Science and faculty and staff, of course.
Thank you. I know that in both for the College of Science and Ecampus, this process has involved gathering a lot of community feedback, a lot of listening, a lot of assessment. And I'm wondering, having led these processes in the College of Science and Ecampus, if you were to maybe talk about a couple things you've learned, and these could be everything from just basic lessons to like epiphanies around around what this work looks like. But the question is really asking you to reflect on what you've learned through this process in both of your units. Mary Ellen, you want to start?
Okay, so I'll start with that. So I think we've learned a whole lot from this process. I've learned a lot personally from this process. So that's been really wonderful. But I've also learned specifically how passionate our eCampus employees have been about this process. So there's been a great amount of interest, a great amount of, I guess passion is the best word around this. So that was really wonderful to learn. And I kind of knew that was the case, and I think our leadership knew that was the case, but this was really an opportunity for us to gather that input and to really understand how passionate a lot of our staff were at this level. So that was great. We also learned that this is a process that, takes a whole lot of time and a whole lot of energy, and that you have to take kind of at scale. And we set our timeline, and of course had to extend our timeline, but also within kind of a set timeline, we had to figure out that okay, there's only a piece of this that we can do as a part of this process. And so that was a real learning, I think, for myself as the chair of a steering committee. I think it was a point of learning for the members of that committee to realize that we can have grand ideas about how to start this process, but we need to focus on one or two paths first. And so I think that was really significant. I think a third thing that I learned is the challenge of kind of negotiating as the chairperson between what the committee and what the employees had to say versus what leadership wanted to project in terms of a plan. So that was an interesting bit of learning that you don't know until you get into it and get in the deep in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Vrushali, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with many of the things that Mary Ellen said. So we have aligned ourselves, the plan with the Office of Institutional Diversity's Innovate and Integrate Plan for Inclusive Excellence, and also with SP 4.0. And since it's a plan for inclusive excellence, you want to make sure you are being inclusive. And being inclusive is hard work. And so, thinking really carefully about how you're going to collect everyone's ideas, opinions, and making sure that everyone has a chance to speak. I mean, that's the hard part. So of course it takes time, it takes energy. Everybody was on the committee is really passionate, but not everyone speaks in the same way or takes the same time to speak. And so I think the one thing that I learned is that I really needed to reach out to people. I hope they think I've reached out enough, but I had to reach out to make sure I heard everybody's voice. And especially when someone's opinion was in the minority, I reached out even more to understand what their opinion was, and to get a sense for, what were the reasons they were coming to this position. So I think thought, which needs time, and time we didn't have. And so getting everyone's opinion, finding the time, thinking through is really what's needed. And that was the big part of what I had to figure out how to do. The other thing I would say is the plan had to be evidence-based. And so we had to read, what is the literature, what is the evidence for all of the strategies that we are trying to put in place? And that takes enormous amounts of time. And so collecting all that literature, asking people to read it, when people are struggling through the pandemic, emotions are high. So that was a second challenge, but I think we've done well.
Yeah, Marilyn, I'm noticing some head nods, and so it sounds like some similar lessons as well.
Yeah, very similar. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think specifically something that I've reflected on is like, you could sit down over a weekend and write a strategic plan, but it wouldn't necessarily represent the community's input. And part of what I've found anyway in doing this work is like the process is really important. Folks need to see themselves reflected in a process, and see how their voice becomes part of, or their experience becomes part of a plan. I don't know if that resonates for you in terms of your leadership of these two committees, but is that something that you noticed as well, as folks needing to you needed to find ways to create, as you mentioned, Vrushali, like pathways for folks to be heard?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the process, at the end of the day, you're going to have a plan, but how you went about getting there will determine how much trust people will have in that plan. And so, yeah, the process is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, and I can kind of speak to that as well in terms of, I think the steering committee that we put together, they really appreciated the process, and they appreciated how much we put into the process, and the journey that the process put them on, and they, continually are still talking about, how important that was for them personally and for the plan itself. So I think you're right about that, Scott.
Kind of mentioned it in terms of challenges or barriers, but whenever we're trying to create any kind of change, but in particularly organizational change, and particularly when we're talking about uprooting centuries old systems of oppression, we're talking about barriers. And so I'm wondering if you can reflect a little bit on maybe some of the barriers or the challenges that you faced. And if there has been a resolution, that's great. But even those barriers that don't have a resolution now, I think are important for us to keep in mind as we, launch plans like this and sort of move into implementation. So Vrushali, would you mind just reflecting on some barriers or challenges?
So time was certainly a challenge, and we were doing this during the pandemic. Stress, because there are different things happening with different people's lives. And so, emotions were high because of whatever was going on, either in the research labs of faculty who had to adjust, or in their personal lives. So I would say that was an issue. And then, of course, making sure that, everyone's voice was heard. I don't think we had as much of a challenge with that. I think we did pretty good, making sure everyone was heard. If not in the meeting, then, outside the meetings, the group meetings that we had, we did a number of breakout sessions. So I would say, just the issue of how do we get all the evidence we're looking for? How do we find time to do that? And we had to make some decisions about, what an action plan means. And it's different from an implementation plan. And so some boundaries and parameters around what we were hoping to achieve. So I think that time was really the major issue. And what Mary Ellen said, which is that that you all had to extend your timeline. So did we. The process is the most important. So it was important that we do this well rather than get it out, at some predetermined time. So we did extend our process as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will second that, time is a concern and definitely an obstacle. And we had set up, a situation where we had set up the expectation where we told our committee members we expected them to do a 1-hour meeting every week, and then 1 to 2 hours outside of that during the week to kind of work on some of this. And so at least our committee was ready for that, although that was a challenge at times to be able to move forward at that sort of pace. And then, of course, this all happening via Zoom because we were in pandemic times. I think by the time we had started this process as a committee, it was September and everyone was kind of used to Zoom, and that was just how we were operating. It's hard for me to know to what degree that would have been different in person. I think in some ways it might have been. So I think to a certain degree that was a challenge. Another aspect of it that I think was a bit of a challenge was, getting folks to see, and not necessarily the committee, but folks outside of the committee to be able to see that we need to be pushing a little bit. And for this to be positive change and positive growth, we have to push some boundaries. And so that was a bit of a challenge that I realized, and it was kind of an unwritten challenge. And I realized that in some cases that was a challenge. And I had to explain to folks that, look, if this is making you uncomfortable, that's actually a good thing, that we've actually pushed a little bit. And that's a little bit of pressure. And if you're like, I don't think we can do that, I had to explain to the committee when we got a comment like that, oh, this is actually a good thing, right? That we've maybe hit on something where we think there is no positive direction, or there is no way we can push through that. And so changing the mindset was a bit of an obstacle that I think we overcame by kind of explaining it to folks in that way, that, that if we're just going to put down easy things in our plan, then we're really not we're not making progress. So I think that was an interesting case of a barrier and obstacle that I think we broke through to a certain degree.
That's awesome. And I totally agree, right? Like that's the crux of a lot of this work is you've got folks who are committed, and then you're continually trying to grow. There's like the piece of this this is important, and we need to do this work in some, for the survival of our organization, frankly. And then it's getting everyone to see that as well. And sort of everyone comes to that realization in different ways, I think, but I like processes like this because I think they can help sort of generate some of that healthy tension.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
You mentioned briefly the pandemic, and that has been a focus of ours also through, or will be in these conversations, is there was so much upheaval this year in terms of the movement for Black Lives and new forms of reckoning that we've needed to have and are continuing to do, but then also all at the same time is this pandemic occurring. And so something that I've been really interested in is how we've actually adapted work like this during these times. And so I'm wondering if y'all can just reflect on like what it's been like to try to conduct a huge sort of college-wide process or unit-wide process like this while at the same time managing being in Zoom and all of that. And have you found any advantages to it? And I'm sure we can identify challenges, but do you think there's been anything that has been positive that's actually grown out of our context?
I can start.
Yeah.
I think one advantage that Zoom has is if people get angry or they've got really strong emotions, you can hide. You can shut your screen. So you've got a mechanism to sort of be there, but also have your own space and reflect, and then come back. And I think that's an advantage, that if you were in a room with everybody and you had really strong emotions come up, there's sort of no escape. You either have to say, I want to leave the room, or you just have to sit there and hold those emotions, and that can be really uncomfortable. I don't know, how many of the members of my team had that happen to them, and if that was useful. But I think for me that I didn't have a choice of turning my screen off, but I could imagine that if I needed that space, I would be able to take it, and I did in some other meetings. So I think that's one advantage that Zoom has. The breakout sessions, we did some breakout sessions. I think that was helpful as well, where you're now in smaller groups. It's pretty efficient. You can all still be, together and then in these sessions and come back pretty fast. So from an efficiency perspective, I thought that was useful as well for how we did our meeting.
Yeah, interesting to think about, the pandemic and how it has, I think it affected Ecampus in ways, in some ways maybe that are different than others, in terms of, we had an enormous enrollment bump, and our staff that was already working at capacity had to kind of work even above that. And so I think to a certain degree that was a barrier and something to adapt to. But like I said, thankfully the committee that I worked with was as committed to this as they were to, trying to get all of their work done as well. But I do think it was a level of stress that added to our process. But in terms of Zoom, I think, like I said, by the time we got to September, we were pretty adept at using Zoom. And I think to a certain degree, some of what Vrushali, you're saying really came into play. I mean, when we got into, really digging into writing goals and objectives, our group of 11 would break off into subgroups and they would meet at different times on Zoom. And I could pop into those meetings knowing exactly where they were and when they were, and I could pop into more than one in an hour's time. And so I think there was some level at which Zoom actually made us a little more adept at being able to communicate with each other. And I'm just trying to, picture, had we all been in conference rooms together, it might have been different. So I think to a certain degree that, we adapted and adjusted as we could.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those observations. I agree. It's sort of like, it feels like we're very much in a new normal. I don't know when all this is gonna end, but I have actually in some cases appreciated like the immediacy of these remote meetings where I get to see people and I can look at everyone at the same time.
Yeah.
And so at least for thinking about hard questions about identity and the real huge obstacles that we face, sometimes this is like a really, I have a lot of hope for the medium is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and actually now that I think about it, I think going back to when we were doing team agreements and trying to decide how we were going to operate, we were in Zoom and being also careful about how we were going to hear voices and give opportunity for people who maybe wouldn't feel comfortable saying something on Zoom in front of everyone, but might be more comfortable writing that. And I think those were all part of those deliberations of our team agreements was the medium that we were using.
So my last question, knowing that we're coming to the end of our time, is what are you looking forward to? As I know both of these processes are kind of coming to a close, and that it's really just the next, we move into the next part, which is now we get down to it and start doing the work. Are there some things that you're looking forward to as these processes move forward or move into their next phase?
Yeah, I'm really excited to move into the next phase. I think our team did a great job. Everyone brought, their own unique perspectives to the process, and they brought the perspectives from their departments. And then we did all these different stakeholder sessions. So we've got, broad input. We've got actions that are going to be impactful and that are really going to help us, fix some of the issues that we identified to begin with. So I'm really excited to see how the implementation happens and, where we're at in a year. We'll see, it's an adaptive process. So we get to adapt and get to come back to the strategic planning process again in some finite amount of time. But I'm really excited. I'm excited to see things change. I don't know if we are going to see a paradigm shift in how we do things, but I'm hoping to see big changes.
Great. Yeah. I'm eager to see folks' reactions also, because we're going to be revealing, as I said, this week. I'm really interested in how our staff is going to really embrace this, and I know they will because we've built this based on the feedback they've given us. And I'm really excited. One of the questions that we're having in breakout rooms at our session this week is, what piece of this do you feel you can contribute to? And I'm really interested to hear what Ecampus employees have to say about, the one piece they feel that they can contribute to. And one of the messages I'm going to be conveying to them is that they're all going to be involved in this. And it's not, one group or one individual that's going to be responsible for all of these actions, and but that it's the whole organization. And I think this is going to be really good for our organization in general to kind of have that kind of purpose that we all share. So I'm looking forward to that. We have identified our implementation team, and I'm really excited to transition from the chairperson to this new chairperson. And I think this implementation team is going to be great. And I'm really happy that we've got 3 people that are going to stay on kind of as the institutional history or the organizational history of this project. So I'm just really excited to see, see it take off at this point.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. This is the part where I say, is there anything that you wanted to say that I didn't ask about or it didn't seem to fit? And if the answer is no, that's just fine. But so I want to make space for that if you'd like.
That's a hard question.
Something you thought, usually when I say it is like, is there something you thought I was going to ask that I didn't ask? And you're disappointed that I didn't ask it.
I could say, oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I was waiting for you to ask how this process has changed us as individuals.
Let's ask that question.
I think it has. I mean, I read a lot during this process, and I read things, some things that I hadn't thought about, didn't know about, rather than getting into the details, just my thinking shifted during this process, and it shifted in really in ways that I think are going to be impactful for myself, but also for what I do for the community. So I'm very pleased that I was able to participate. I'm really honored that I was chosen to do this, to take the lead on this action planning, and I think it has changed me for the better in some ways. Mm-hmm. And yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and that's a perfect question to kind of cover what I was actually going to say, and that and I think I've mentioned this to Scott before, that this process really stretched me in ways that I didn't anticipate it would stretch me, and it was really, really great for so many reasons. To work with this group of people that was just so fantastic, and then the amount of kind of thought and energy and effort that I had to put into figuring out how to do this on Zoom, amidst all of the chaos that was going on around us, was really an experience for me that really stretched me and made me grow and made me really expand in many ways. So that was a perfect question for us to end with, I think.
Well, thank you both. And just personally, thank you for just being great colleagues and for working on this planning process with, I mean, when I was able to contribute, it's been really, really good and fun. And I mean that, right? Like something that I feel very strongly that like a process like this should be hard and it should create joy and optimism. Like we should be looking towards something that's new. We're trying to create something new. And so to that extent, it was I also learned a lot working with both of you. And it's like the best part of my job, I think, is getting the chance to interface with so many and meet so many different folks. So yeah,
and your partnership has been really important. Mm-hmm. So you should know that.
I promise I wasn't fishing for compliments. It truly is.
And our team just has raved for months and months about the trainings that we've gotten from your office and how wonderful the materials are, and all the readings that we did. Our committee was really passionate about everybody should get to see these readings, and so we're including them in the folder with our plan. And so I second that we really appreciate the support that your office has given us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I will take it.
Yep.